Ahead, I'll talk with Genevieve Wheeler Brown about her book, Beyond Blue and White, The Hidden History of Delftware and the Women Behind the Iconic Ceramic. We'll learn about how a box of centuries-old ceramics led her to discover a forgotten history of entrepreneurs, collectors, and cultural pioneers. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Genevieve Wheeler Brown is a decorative arts advisor, writer, and longtime specialist in the world of antiques and material culture. She has more than 3 decades of experience working with historic objects, including years at Christie's in New York and London, and appearances as an appraiser on Antiques Roadshow. Genevieve, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Dan, thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.
Let's start where you begin the book. Tell us about Delftware. What is it?
Well, it's this fantastic, it is an iconic, form of art from the Dutch Republic. I mean, maybe when I say the word Delftware, maybe you'll think of those square Dutch tiles, sometimes of a tulip, maybe a little figure, or maybe you'll think of those fantastic pyramidal towers with little spouts holding tulips. I mean, they're fantastic. They can almost be 6 feet tall. Or maybe most commonly we think of those plates, those circular chargers, covered with flowers and birds, blue and white, gorgeously painted. Sometimes we see them mounted on walls, but simple, like defining the term, it's tin glazed earthenware. It's not porcelain. Delftware is tin glazed earthenware that was made in the Dutch Republic from roughly the 1620s to about 1840. It's really one of those defining arts of the Dutch Golden Age, together with Vermeer and Rembrandt. But it's art that we can, hold in our hands.
You point out that those tiles were made sort of throughout Holland, but the Delftware specifically was made in a very specific area and required years of training to do.
Absolutely. It's something that looks so simple, but when you dive, if you go beyond the surface, you'll learn that, behind those beautiful, simple brick facades in Delft were 30 to 50 specialists, each with their own skill, which they would train since they were probably a child. Each step towards making that one dish or bowl or fantastic work of art, like a tulip, one of those tulip tower, tulipiers. They could take, weeks to create. Some were simply, made for utilitarian wares. Others were really works to be admired and seldomly touched. So, it's a broad variety, but yes, it is actually a very complicated process.
Well, before we talk about some of the history you unearthed behind these pieces of art, give us a brief overview of this book. What are readers going to find here?
Well, it's Beyond Blue and White is it's an art history, but it's also a blue and white mystery. So it's all about the rediscovery of a group of works and the secrets that they hold. It's about, looking beyond what seems maybe purely decorative and discovering, the larger stories of, global trade and cultural exchange. And actually for me, which was surprising, as an art, I've been in the art world for more than 30 years, at Christie's, on the Antiques Roadshow, but discovering really the depth of women's experience that's tied to this, to this decorative art.
So in this book, you start on the journey by a collection of Delftware that came to light in New York. Tell us about that discovery and sort of the moment when you decided, there's a story behind here that needs to be told.
Oh my goodness. So as I said, I've been in the, I've been an art advisor, in the auction world for more than 30 years. So, just before COVID, I was asked to come see a collection of Dutch Delftware that was, the property of a women's organization that was founded during New York's, Gilded Age. And it was in a, quiet townhouse on a side street in the Upper East Side. And what I thought was going to be maybe a handful of those, those beautiful plates turned out to be more than 75 pieces of rare 17th and 18th century Dutch Delftware. And it opened the doors because it as these pieces were gorgeous. But what I also discovered were the lives of the women who made, were the owners of the potteries, who were the women who brought these pieces to this collection. And it opened a door, Dan, to some unexpected surprises. And what I initially did was I was asked to create a lecture based on, my findings for the organization. And I believe in serendipity because it was COVID. So the lecture was, online, and it was seen by a literary agent who called me up again, out of the blue and said, "You don't know me, but I think what you have here is a greater story that should be told." And so I considered her offer, and it turned to 5 years of research across, the East Coast, England, and of course the Netherlands. And Beyond Blue and White is this journey that I took.
Well, tell us about some of the women you discovered who were responsible for creating this art and making it popular. Because from what I gleaned from the book is that these women actually wielded a lot of power in a time when women were marginalized.
Yeah, it was surprising on so many levels, because what I unearthed, and what was actually very surprising to Europeans in the 1600s, was that Dutch women actually had much more agency than we could have possibly ever imagined. I mean, young Dutch girls were in the same schools as boys. Legally, they had many more rights than other Europeans. There was no primogeniture, so a young woman would inherit equally as her brother. But then she also had this tremendous this education that included, if you're ready for this, financial literacy. So young women were taught how to balance the books. They were trained in business, so they're coming to the table, Dan, with some pretty remarkable skills. And so the Delftware, market reflects how, young women, could found their own potteries. If they inherited a pottery, if they were partners with their husband, they could easily step into that role, as owner. And what I found out was that 1 in 5 of these potteries were owned by women, throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. And the women that I met were truly remarkable because, of course, we know Vermeer, from Delft, but we don't know about women. A woman named Barbara Rodeville, who was 5 years older than Vermeer, grew up 3 blocks away from him in Delft. We know exactly from these fantastic archives where she lived, who her parents were, where, the streets that she walked. She survives the famous thunderclap, which was the famous explosion in 1654 when a third of Delft went up in a gunpowder explosion. It was the largest man-made explosion at the time, in the history. And she not only survives the famous thunderclap, but she goes on to found her own pottery. And she joins even the Guild of St. Luke, which was headed up by Vermeer. So this is an incredible woman who defies the odds. And, and her legacy was a business that survived for more than 100 years. And then fast forwarding to the 19th century, we hear about, J.P. Morgan and Cornelius Vanderbilt, but what about their wives? And what was intriguing to me was that, it was New York's, Gilded Age. Women couldn't vote, of course, and they weren't invited to the museum table. They weren't, the Metropolitan Museum wouldn't have their first female trustee until the 1930s. So what did Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt II and Mrs. J.P. Morgan do? They founded their own museum in the 1890s, which they could run and oversee. And it turns out that this collection of Delftware was a part of their museum. So it kind of takes us from maker to preservationist, museum founder in one, arcing narrative. And I'd never seen anything like this in my life. And, these are incredible women in a variety of, fascinating roles.
I'm curious about the role of Queen Mary II. Tell us about how she plays into this story.
Oh, yeah. And you're hitting it right in the center. I mean, she is that pivotal. She was of course, a young English princess who marries into the Dutch royal family. She becomes wife, of course, of William III, who's then brought back to England. So they come back as King William and Mary, the duo that we know well. But she is actually fascinated by the Dutch Delftware, and she becomes its greatest patron, and she elevates it through her commissions, not just in the Dutch Republic, but when she becomes Queen of England, she brings that back with her to England. So she's responsible not only for the creativity and giving patronage, to break the boundaries of tin glazed earthenware, make monumental sculptures, which we can still see. You and I can see the few remaining pieces, that are out at Hampton Court, just outside of London. So she's responsible. She's that catalyst for not just artistic creativity, but the spreading of the popularity of this blue and white, which, you and I see, so often, throughout, not just in Europe, but in America, in our former Dutch and English territories primarily, but spreading, west actually, through the Midwest. So she's, again, another pivotal female who's a part of this great story of Delftware.
Tell us a bit about the research. And I'm curious how you were able to trace these works of art back to where they were created. Were there some sort of like pottery manufacturer marks that would tell you where they came from, or was it much harder than that?
Oh gosh. So the beauty of this, and I really feel like we're in a golden age our own, in terms of research, archives, information, marks, as you said. We have this constellation of, fascinating, facts. And so there are great, we've been, historians have been documenting marks, for it really the sort of the study of these marks really begins in the 19th century when the basically, ceramics started to be seen as a work of art itself. And so there's considerable, scholarship starting in the mid 19th centuries, like documenting, right, these marks, documenting the names, going through the archives. So you have just a variety of sources. I was using everything, right, from looking at marks, but then, going into, the manuscripts of the Delft archives themselves. Where did they live? What are the everyday, birth and death records? Where can we find out, what was, other examples? Looking, but even looking at fine art, looking at paintings from the period, looking at, and I love this, I have this one book that I couldn't put down, which was a late 17th century cookbook. How were ceramics used in everyday life? And you're looking at these incredible, broad variety of sources, when you're trying to, create more color, in terms of the background and the stories. And I feel like we're surrounded by such a huge amount of information right now. And I think the fun of it and actually the task at hand is how do we connect those dots? Because, and I think that's the greatest role of historians. We have AI, we have all these great resources, but really how we connect those dots to redefine how we look at history is, I think, the next great, next fascinating, subject for historians. It's all there at our fingertips.
And this artwork tells a history that the history books don't. So you can get a fuller picture of actually what was going on during a particular time period by the story that these works of art tell.
Absolutely. I think objects are really, again, it's history that you hold in your hands. And so, the books that I enjoyed when I was a student were, there's Witold Rybczynski's, his analysis of home. What is our relationship with these objects? How did they become, how do we, what is our the greater picture of how objects related to, to our lives, reflect our lives, reflect, the immediate history. The study of material culture, I think, is invaluable, and enlightening, and it just brings the history to life.
The story of Delftware and all the people behind it is fascinating, but this is a story which I think would be fascinating for anyone who wants to learn to have a greater appreciation of art and objects and not think, oh, that's pretty, that's attractive, but think about the history behind it and the people behind it, so you much more fully appreciate what you're looking at.
Oh, there's so much there. There's so many more secrets to be, revealed, I think, every day. And I encourage everyone just to reach out into your own homes. Maybe it's a piece that, your grandmother, had in her home, or, going even further back. Find out, even about your immediate family, why is this object in our family, and how is it connected to like the greater, cultural, history, even, of even the past, few decades. I think it's fascinating.
I also want to point out that the book, in addition to the text, has photographs and diagrams and lots of additional information to help you more fully understand this story and the history.
Yeah, I hope that the images just bring everyone happiness, because there is truly nothing like walking into a room of blue and white. There's something in your brain that just lights up, that cobalt, that tin glaze, that, the reflections of, light on ceramic surfaces. I mean, it's a magic experience. So I hope that, through photography, we can even get a taste of it. But we have some pretty great collections, even in the United States, that you can visit in person. I know the Nelson Atkins has maybe a couple of pieces. But I think then heading to the East Coast, go to Philadelphia, see those period rooms, that bring you, right into Holland in the 17th century, or, step into the Met, or head up to Boston and see the Delftware together with the paintings that were created at the time. So you're seeing the fine and decorative arts together, in concert, as they would have been in the 17th century. We have some great resources on this side of the Atlantic, too.
To learn more, the book is Beyond Blue and White, The Hidden History of Delftware and the Women Behind the Iconic Ceramic, by Genevieve Wheeler Brown. Genevieve, thank you for talking with me today.
Oh, Dan, this was such a pleasure. I've been really happy to be with you.
If you'd like to purchase Beyond Blue and White, I've placed a link for you in the description below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you know when I post new interviews. Meanwhile, here are 2 more books you might find interesting. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.